The Beaver Dam. Millions of beaver ponds graced America's wild gardens at the time the first settlers came. These ragged and poetic ponds varied in length from a few feet to 1 mile, and in area they were from 100 acres down to a miniature pond that half a dozen merry children might encircle. These ponds were formed by dams built by beaver, and the dams varied greatly in size and were made of poles variously combined with sticks, stones, trash, rushes, and earth. In the Badlands of Dakota, I saw 2 dams that were made of chunks of coal. This material had caved from a nearby bluff. I have noticed a few that were constructed of cobblestones. The waterfront of these dams was filled and covered with clay, and they were the work of grass beavers, beaver that subsist chiefly on grass and that live in localities almost destitute of trees. It is doubtful if a dam is ever made by felling logs or large trees across the stream. I have, however, seen a few real log dams, but in these the logs were placed parallel to the flow of water. One of these was in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho. Here a snowslide swept several hundred trees down the mountain. This wreckage was piled on the bank of a stream. Beaver in a colony a short distance away accepted this gift of the gods, and of these unwieldy logs built a dam about 200 feet downstream from where the avalanche had piled the logs. This dam was a massive affair, about 40 feet long and 8 feet high. It really appeared more like a log jam than a dam, but it served the purpose intended and raised the level of the river so that the water overflowed to one side and spread in a broad sheet against a cliff and through a grove of aspens, which the beaver proceeded to harvest. The majority of dams are made of slender green poles, which are placed lengthwise with the flow for the bottom, and set braced with the end upstream a foot or so higher than the downstream end. With these there are occasionally used small, limby trees. The large end of the tree is placed upstream, and the small bushy end downstream. If in a current, these sometimes are weighed down with mud or stone. Short, stout sticks and long, slender poles are deftly mingled in the dam as it rises. The poles overlie, and many completed dams appear as though made of gigantic, inclined, half-closed shears and compasses of poles. Thus a dam is doubly braced. The weight against it is restricted both by the end-on poles that are parallel to the flow and by those set at an angle to it. The shape and the material of a dam are dependent on a number of things: the nature of the place where built, the kind of materials available for its building, the purpose it is intended to serve, and the relation it may have to dams already constructed. Sometimes a small dam will be made that may ultimately become a big one by simply digging a ditch across the stream or basin and piling the excavated material into a dam. Beaver, like men, are unequal in their skill, both in planning and in doing work, and the work of most beaver falls short of perfection. Errors are not uncommon. More than one colony has commenced a dam apparently without knowing that there was not sufficient available material to complete it. Others have built in the wrong places, and have thus failed to flood the area which they desired to reach or cover with water. Occasionally the difficulties of construction have been too great for the beaver who attempted it, and the dam has been abandoned in an incomplete state. Now and then a weak dam breaks, or a strong one is swept out by a flood. But why do beaver need or want a pond which the dam forms? They need it for the purpose of maintaining water of sufficient depth and area to enable them to move about in safety, and to transport their food supplies with the greatest ease. Above all, the pond is a place of refuge into which the beaver can constantly plunge and have security from his numerous and ever watchful enemies. The house entrance must be kept water-covered. In the water, the beaver is in his element. On land, he is a child lost in the wilds. He has extremely short legs and a heavy body. His makeup fits him for movement in the water. He is a graceful swimmer and in the water can move easily and evade enemies, while on land he is an awkward lubber, moves slowly, and is easily overtaken. Water of sufficient depth and area, then, is essential to the life and happiness of the beaver. To have this at all times, it is necessary, in localities where the supply is at times insufficient, to maintain it by means of dams and ponds. Deep ponds are needed around the house. Shallow ponds with shores in nearby groves facilitate faraway logging. Dams are placed across streams whose waters are to be led away through new channels and made to serve elsewhere in canals or ponds. Dams are made across inclined canals to catch and hold water in them. Streams are beavers' avenues of travel. Along shallow streams in a beaver country, it is not uncommon to see an occasional short dam which forms a deep hole, which apparently is maintained as a harbor or place of safety into which traveling beaver may dive and be made safe from pursuit. Most beaver dams are built on the installment plan. They are the result of growth. The new dam is short and comparatively low. It is enlarged as conditions may require. As the trees in the edge of the pond are harvested, the dam is built higher and longer so as to flood a larger area, or as sediment fills the pond, the dam is from time to time raised and lengthened in order to maintain the desired depth of water. Thus it may grow through the years until the possibilities of the locality are exhausted. The dam may then be abandoned. It may be used for a few years, or it may be used for a century. A gigantic beaver dam may thus represent the work of several generations of beaver. It often occurs that one or more generations may use a dam and yearly add something to its size. By and by, these beaver may die or emigrate. The old dam remains, falling to ruin in places. Years go by and other beaver come upon the scene. The old dam is then used for the foundation for a new one. The appearance of some old dams indicates that they have been repeatedly used and abandoned. New dams, being made largely of coarse materials, appear very unlike old ones. Decay, settling, repairs, and other changes come rapidly. The dam is built of poles today. It speedily becomes earthy and is planted by nature to grass, willows, and flowers. On old large dams, it is not uncommon to see old forest trees. The roots of these entangle the constructive materials, penetrate deeply, and help to anchor securely the entire dam. In only a few cases are the waterfronts of dams at once plastered or filled in with mud. This is done only where there is a scarcity of water. It is the aim of the beaver to raise the water in the pond to a certain height and there maintain it, the chief purpose of the dam being to regulate the height or the depth of the water. The water, in streaming through new dams, deposits therein quantities of sticks, trash, and sediment, so that in a year or two these choke the holes, almost stopping the leakage of the water and help to solidify the dam. The discharge from dams is regulated by the beaver. In some instances, water leaks through a dam in numerous places from bottom to top. In others, it seeps through only close to the top. And in still others, the dam is so solid that the water pours over the top in a thin sheet. In some cases, however, instead of the water pouring over the entire length of the dam, the beavers force it to pour over in a given stretch at one end or the other, or sometimes through a hole or tunnel. The concentration of the overflow at some one point in the dam is commonly done either for the purpose of using it in transportation or to force the water to outpour on a spot where it will least erode the foundation of the dam. Occasionally, beaver compel the water to flow round the end of a dam, which they raise sufficiently high for that purpose. Sometimes they dig a wasteway for the water. European beaver appear to have barely developed the dam building stage. Rarely did they build even a small, unimportant dam, nor did all the American beaver build dams. At the time the beaver population was most numerous and widely distributed, probably not more than half of them used the dam. However, those not using the dam were living in places where the dam and consequent pond were not needed. Dam building enormously increased the habitable beaver area. There were and are thousands of brooks which each year cease to flow for a period, yet on these brooks are all other beaver requirements except a permanent sufficient water supply. By dam building, water is stored for tomorrow, or stream courses changed, and with the assistance of canals, water is diverted to a dry ravine where a colony is established. The dam is the largest and in many respects the most influential beaver work. Across a stream it is an inviting thoroughfare for the folk of the wild. As soon as a dam is completed, it becomes a wilderness highway. It is used day and night. Across it go bears and lions, rabbits and wolves, mice and porcupines. Chipmunks use it for a bridge. Birds alight upon it. Trout attempt to leap it. And in the evening the graceful deer cast their reflections with the willows in its quiet pond. Across it dash pursuer and pursued. Upon it take place battles and courtships. Often it is torn by hoof and claw. Death struggles stain it with blood. Many a drama, romantic and picturesque, fierce and wild, is staged upon the beaver dam. The beaver dam gives new character to the landscape. It frequently alters the course of a stream and changes the topography. It introduces water into the scene. It nourishes new plant life. It brings new birds. It provides a harbor and a home for fish throughout the changing seasons. It seizes sediment and soil from the rushing waters, and it sends water through subterranean ways to form and feed springs which give bloom to terraces below. It is a distributor of the waters, and on days when the dark clouds are shaken with heavy thunder, the beaver dam silently breasts, breaks, and delays the down-rushing floodwaters, saves and stores them. Then through all the rainless days that follow, it slowly releases them. Most old colonies have many dams and ponds. A dam is sometimes built for the purpose of forcing water back into one side into a grove that is to be harvested for food. In many cases, water flows round the end of a dam, and in making its way back to the main channel is intercepted by another dam, then another, and thus the water from one small brook maintains a cluster or chain of pondlets. The majority of beaver dams are as crooked as a river's course. Now and then one is straight. A few are built from shore to a boulder, from the boulder to a willow clump, and finally, perhaps, from willow clump to some outstretching peninsula on the farther shore. It is not uncommon for a short dam to be built and afterwards lengthened with additions on each end which may curve either down or upstream. Sometimes a dam is built outward from opposite shores simultaneously by separate but cooperating crews of beaver. In swift water, these ends are forced downstream in building, so that when they are finally joined midstream, the dam curves noticeably downstream. On one occasion, I watched beaver commence and complete a dam in moderately swift water that, when finished, bowed strongly upstream. This, however, was not the intention of the builders. The material for this dam consisted of willow and alder poles that were cut some distance upstream. These were floated down as used. This dam began all against a huge boulder near midstream and built outward simultaneously toward both shores. Despite the repeated efforts of the builders to extend it in a straight line to the shore, The flow of the water pushed these outbuilding ends downward, and when they finally reached the shore, this 50-odd feet of dam with the boulder for a keystone had an arch that was about 15 feet in advance of the bases. Not far from where I lived in the mountains when a boy, the Beaver built a dam. This had a slight arch upstream. A few years later, the dam was doubled in length by building an extension on the end which bowed downstream. It thus stood a reverse curve. Later, the dam was still further lengthened by a comparatively straight stretch on one end and by a short down-bowing stretch on the other. Recent additions to this dam consist of wings at the end which sweep upstream. The dam as it now stands reaches about 3/4 of the way around the pond which it forms. It is not uncommon for a dam to be planned and built with an arch against the current or against the water which it afterwards impounds. The most interesting dam of this kind that I ever saw was one across the narrow neck of a rudely bell-shaped basin that was about 200 feet in length. The material for this dam came from a grove of aspens that extended into one side of the basin. The floor of this basin was partly covered with a few inches of water. In starting the dam, the Beaver evidently knew where they wanted to build it. This was not by the aspen grove, where the materials were convenient, where the dam would need to be about 120 feet long, but was about 50 feet farther on, where a dam of only 40 feet was required. This dam, when completed, bowed 7 feet against the enclosed water. The Beaver commenced building at the end nearest the grove of aspens, pulling and dragging the poles the 50 feet to it. They laid these aspen poles, which were 2 to 5 inches in diameter and from 4 to 12 feet in length, at right angles to the length of the dam, and usually placed the large end upstream or against the current. But the water was shallow, and the transportation of these poles to the dam was difficult. Accordingly, a ditch or canal was dug from the grove to the place by the dam where the work was going on. This ditch was about 25 inches wide and 15 deep. The waters filled it, and thereby afforded an easy means of floating or transporting the poles from the grove to the place where they were being used. This ditch was carried forward along the upper line of the dam and several feet in advance of the spot where the outbuilding work was advancing. Upon the earth thrown up from this were laid the upper or high ends of the poles. When the dam was finally completed, it was approximately 8 feet wide on the base and stood 4 feet high. As soon as it was completed, the Beaver stuffed the waterfront with mud and grass roots, which were obtained by digging from the construction ditch immediately in front of the dam. In other words, they enlarged their pole-floating ditch above the dam into a deeper and wider channel, and used this excavated material for strengthening and waterproofing the dam. The longest beaver dam that I have ever seen or measured was on the Jefferson River near Three Forks, Montana. This was 2,140 feet long. Most of it was old. More than half of it was less than 6 feet in height. 2 short sections of it, however, were 23 feet wide at the base, 5 on top, and 14 feet high.